we go to the next speaker. As we always say, one nice lady is always followed by another very nice lady. The problem is now that uh, when I have to describe the curriculum vitae of Mrs. Charikleia Apalagaki, that will take me at least half a day because it's too long. The thing is that Mrs. Charikleia Apalagaki is a pillar of our banking system, and that's why it's always very important to listen to her point of view. Mrs. Apalagaki, please.
Good morning, everybody. Dear Mr. Kostas, I extend again the sincere thanks, ladies and gentlemen, to Ethos Media, to our friends in the meantime, Mr. Uzounis and Mr. Kostas. It's indeed, we work close with them, and we afford all their initiatives because they are always updated. We see that they insist on their invents, even if they have to adjust them to the current difficult situation. Well, I open my introductory speech with a background. Indeed, on corporate governance, Greece has made a lot of progress the last 20 years. Let's remind to everybody that we started in 2002 with a law imposing to the listed companies to have a mixed composition of executive and non-executive members of the board. That has been the primary context of corporate governance, and everything else was not included. Some years after, it became evident that corporate governance is not only the composition of the board, it has to be completed with other substantial elements like the whole structure of a listed company, the skills of the board, and in first line, the permanent and daily duty of the top management to provide a good example to all stakeholders, to employees, to lenders, to supervisors, for having a reasonable and fair run of business. Short after, transparency became a further core element of corporate governance, and therefore the recent law, as has been described in details by Mr. Chairwoman of the Capital Market Committee, are not anymore limited to the composition of the board and to the structure of the company, but they include all areas of business and relations of the company to third parties, lenders, creditors, employees, and supervisors. Of course, I have to underline that we support both not only the legislation development, so we have worked close to the Capital Market Committee and to the Legislation Committee for the revise of the law. We are also
Mr. Apalagaki, I think you should take your microphone a little closer to your mouth so we can listen to you
Okay,
just a
I'll
little bit.
try. We have also been a voluntary member and a founder of this Council for Corporate Governance, and we have afforded recently our final contribution for the updating of the existing code of 2013. Of course, I have to underline that the first listed companies to have got the influence, the deep influence of the corporate governance standards, where the banks have been considered to be an area of high risk, and therefore the lack of high corporate governance standards has been linked to the crisis of 2008. So I'm permitted to say that the first case that we have these enhanced corporate governance standards has been then banking industry in Greece and, of course, abroad. Corporate governance is still a weak point for listed companies, mainly against activist shareholders, which consider laxing the corporate governance to establish a very nice opportunity for hostile attacks in the business and reputations. We have recently also a good example in the Greek market. An effective protection against such an event could be supervision. I shall close my speech with some, let's say, instructions to the supervisor, and transparency both in financial and non-financial data. Of course, now the banks, having completed, I would say, all their internal corporate governance structure, try or are about to impose these high standards also to their borrowers. 2 or 3 years before, all the Greek banks, supported by a Hellenic Bank Association, have drafted the Magna Carta of lending, including the requirements that a company has to meet. Nevertheless, whether this company is listed or not listed. And so we have given also some good ideas to the recent legislation. It's not only a matter of the persons who are the leaders of the company and of the board, it's also a matter of structure. It's also banks ask their borrowers to be ready to go through any kind of risk, environmental risk, cybersecurity risk, reputation risk, business risk. So I think that today we have in place all the elements that we need. We have updated legislation, we have a mature banking system, and we have a new generation of companies who have the willingness, or they do have, to implement all those modern requirements. But as lawyer, Mr. Costas omitted to say that my main capacity is to be a lawyer and a teacher and a professor of law. That's my permanent capacity. Well, it makes a difference between theory and praxis. How we can, yes, I'm teaching a procedural law, so the implementation of the rules is very relevant for me, and I think for all the people in business. What does it mean? We have strict rules, but we need somebody who shall be there in order to address all the necessary instructions to the companies that they have, what do they have to apply and to do in business. I'm not sure that supervisors, in generally speaking, have completed their task regarding the proactive actions. Of course, we have ex post and ex ante sanctions. We change the board of directors, or we impose fines, or we even start proceedings, legal proceedings against them. But that is not sufficient. It should be aware for everybody, companies, banks, and supervisors, that we have to be engaged proactively, and I'm quite sure that having now a long and good experience and also the right managements in place, we shall succeed to implement corporate governance and not only to be restricted to legislation. Thank you, and I wish all a good success to the event.
Thank you, Mrs. General Secretary of the Hellenic Bank Association. Thank you, Mrs. Apalagaki, for being with us another year, one more time in this corporate governance summit.